I've got into the habit of starting my talks by thanking people who have helped me with my thinking, especially for this particular talk. And so this talk is dedicated to Akim, who not only invited me here, but got me thinking about this whole notion of the relationship between writing and other worlds, and to Marianne and to Anusha for conversation that we had last night, which was so exciting and stimulating that I couldn't sleep, and I rewrote everything that I was going to say. And then I decided not to read it. So I need to tell you about 3 books that I've written, which explains how we've got here. So most of you are seeing my work through the Endangered Alphabets Project. And the book that I've written that contains all of that information is called An Atlas of Endangered Alphabets. And that, I think, may be in the bookshop, and you can certainly get it and my other books at endangeredalphabets.com, and you go to shop. But what happened after looking at all of these remarkable scripts from around the world was I imagined myself like a 19th century explorer. In my mind, I was English. In your mind, I'm Dutch. That's quite okay. And I've come back to tell people about all of these amazing forms of writing I found around the world. And I've got a magic lantern show, going here. And at some point, somebody in the back of the room stamps their foot and says, "This is all very well, young man." Because, of course, in my mind, I am a young man. But what does this tell us about writing itself? And so I started thinking a lot more about what is writing. And so my second book, which is called Writing Beyond Writing, also available at the same link, really asks the question, by looking at this extraordinary diversity, what does that tell us about why we write and how we write and what can be called writing? And it really pushes a lot of boundaries back. But my third book, in a way, is what I want to talk to you most about today. It's called By Hand, and I wrote it by hand because I wanted to understand the relationship between the person and the pen or the pencil and the surface and the person reading it. And also because my handwriting when I started was awful because I'm a professional writer. And so most of the writing I do is on a computer, on a keyboard, etc. And I thought, how does it change us? Okay, I'm going to put my hand up whenever I say something that is really deep. So you know when to write notes. Okay. How does it change us to write badly? How does it change us to write on a keyboard? And I figured that the only way I could find this out was actually by writing the book by hand. And I was curious to see whether this would actually change my handwriting. And at the end of all of this, if you're interested, you can come up and have a look at my journal, which is up here, which I'm going to refer to a couple of times. So I'm looking at the question, where does writing come from? And the next little bit, I apologize, it's going to sound kind of like a lecture, but that's because I actually wrote it and I'm speaking it from memory. Most of the rest of what I'm talking about is going to be completely spontaneous, which means I have no idea how long it will take, and you're going to have to drag me off the stage. Okay, so nobody has asked the question, where does writing come from, more than an American scholar called Norman Fruman. Doesn't matter if you haven't heard of him. Because Fruman was really interested in the poetry of the English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Some of you will know him, some of you don't know him, doesn't matter, I'll fill this in. So Coleridge wrote an extraordinary poem, one of the most extraordinary poems in the English language, called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And I was saying, I'm delivering this to a Dutch audience. There may be ancient mariners in the audience. And what Fruman decided he was going to read through this poem and try and find every word or phrase that Coleridge had taken from his extensive reading, because Coleridge was a voracious reader. And he read a lot of travel accounts, for example. And he Fruman winds up writing a book called The Damaged Archangel, and about Coleridge. And essentially he accuses Coleridge of plagiarism. So let me tell you about this poem, which, as I say, doesn't matter if you haven't read it. So it's an extraordinary poem. It was written in the beginning of the 19th century in deliberately archaic, old-fashioned language, because this is an old sailor who has been telling his tale over and over and over again forever. And he begins, "There was a ship," quoth he, but we don't know the ship's name, we don't know where it sailed from, we don't know where it was going, we don't know why it was going there. All we know is that that ship goes through hell. It is trapped in the ice, it is becalmed, people nearly die of thirst, there are sea snakes in the water. It is in many ways the first existential poem. In the midst of this extraordinary universe, and in fact I may actually quote you from a part of the poem, because Fruman, for example, points out that in his reading, Coleridge came across a reference to what the sun looks like when the ship is becalmed in the around the equator where there's no wind. And this travel document uses the word copper. And so what Coleridge does with this is this incredible thing where he goes, "All in a hot and copper sky, the bloody sun at noon, right up above the mast did stand, no bigger than the moon. Day after day, we stuck, nor breath nor motion, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean." So the mariner does something unforgivable. He commits a crime, a small crime. He shoots an albatross. And it isn't even clear why. He just shot it. And for that reason, he becomes cursed. And everybody else on the ship dies except him. And he's kept alive in agony to tell his story over and over again. And as I say, Fruman goes through this poem for 700 pages. And he says, look, I found this phrase here, I found this word here, I found this here, etc., etc. But the sum total of Fruman's book is entirely negative, because when you take away all that, there is no poem left. It's like Sir Thomas Browne, who in the mid-17th century thought, I must find the location of the soul. And he dissected a sparrow. And he found what he was left with was a dead bird. And he couldn't find the soul anywhere. So what this tells us is that memory is not just words, and writing is not just memory. It encourages us to start thinking about what memory is and where writing comes from in that sense. So, memory is not like a bookshelf. So on your bookshelf, you can see what's there. You think you know where something is. You can go there and you can open it. Memory isn't like that at all. This is what memory is like. So, I was sitting in the British Library a week ago thinking about this, and as I was there, the face of a man flashed across what Coleridge's friend Wordsworth called my inner eye. So this was somebody I knew. I knew this person, and I thought maybe it was an actor, and it was gone. So I don't know why I remember this person. I don't know who this person was. I can't even remember why it was I was trying to think of that particular thing. Instead, what we had was, it was like being on a train. I've been on a lot of trains recently. It was like being on a train, and a train goes past in the opposite direction, and you see a face, and it's gone. You don't know where it came from. You don't know where it went to. So what this says is that the whole notion of memory as a source is a very perplexing thing if we can't control it. If, in fact, we are sort of at its mercy. It no longer becomes our memory. It becomes whatever memory is available to us. So, for example, I know the capital of Australia. When I was sitting in the British Library, I could not remember the capital of Latvia. I was fairly confident that I knew the capital of Australia because I had talked about it to somebody a couple of days previously, so I knew I remembered it. I had no idea whether I would ever in my life again know what the capital of Latvia is until that evening I watched England play Latvia in soccer, and it's like, oh, yeah, right. So some time ago, I spent a lot of time. I do these strange things. Every book I write, I try and actually take part in. And so I spent some time, as it were, standing on my own shoulder, looking inside my own head, trying to see where ideas come from. And I didn't come to a conclusion, but I came to an image. So imagine that in this stage, there is a trap door. Okay, so it's a door that's cut that you can open, right? And there's light up here, but under the trap door, there's no light. But there's water. In fact, there's a large tank of water. And in the water are eels. Lots and lots of eels. And the light shining from over there, in fact, means that these eels, as they appear toward the top of the tank, they glisten for a second and they disappear again. And this has nothing to do with this, by the way. And it's an extraordinary notion that is going on inside us, and we have almost no control over it whatsoever. But what we can do... Okay. Oh, I have my endangered alphabets traveling. Yeah. But thank you. I appreciate the concern. But what we can do is we can actually help that process. And Einstein did this with a key. Thank you. So, one of the things that is really interesting about the state, what's sometimes called a hypnagogic state between when you're awake and when you're asleep, is that on that borderline, really interesting things begin to happen. And Einstein got into the habit of going to bed with a large brass key in his hand. He would lie in bed with his hand over the edge of the bed, and he had a big bowl, metal bowl. And so as he fell asleep, eventually his hand would let go, and the key would fall out and hit the bowl with a loud clang, and he would wake up, and he would remember what he had been thinking at that moment. And I tried this by accident once when I was exhausted. I spent a lot of my time exhausted. That's why I'm really grateful to you people for taking care of me. I may collapse at any moment. And I had my journal with me, and we'll come back to the journal in a minute. And I began writing, and I fell asleep as I was writing. I did not know that was possible. And more than anything else, I wanted to read you what I wrote. But it was actually in the journal before this one. I don't have it with me. But it was the most imaginative thing I have ever written. It was something about me talking to somebody about the soldiers over there, and then everybody knows that the top of the hillside is less fertile than the valley. Right? I have no idea where that came from. But here's the thing, ladies and gents. Here's the thing. It's exactly those moments that make you want to write them down and that make great poetry. So the glimpse of the stranger in the train going by, when we see it like that, the sheer fact that it's so unexplained and so mysterious and it's gone, it leaves us with that sense that it's important. We may be wrong, but it is vivid and it's sort of like, this is something. This is something. So I want to bring Anusha in right now. So here I am thinking about where does writing come from and where do ideas come from. And Anusha and I were talking yesterday evening, and she said, so what's the difference then between talking and writing? Sorry, I put my hand up. Deep, right. What's the difference between talking and writing? And so when I was writing by hand, there were certain times when I had so many things going on in my mind that I had to get stuff down, but I was driving. And so I would get my phone out and start dictating. Seriously, it's very dangerous to drive near me. If you ever see me in a car, pull over. But what I discovered was that when I had ideas and I was dictating, I would be kind of going, blah, 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 blah. It was very discontinuous. And yet when I write in my journal, my hand just keeps going. It's very, very fluent. And I thought, this is really odd. What is going on here? I mean, this is really the phenomenology of writing that I'm really interested in. I thought, is it possible that my mind is working so much faster than my hand that actually I'm able to generate things in my mind, think about writing them down, and before my pen even gets to that word, I've thought again and again and changed it. And I thought, and what's more, my mind is capable of doing that and syncing it with the movement of the hand, so the hand never stops. That is some pretty wild brain stuff going on there. In my interviews that I did for this book, I've talked to several neurologists who think the act of writing by hand may be the single most sophisticated function the brain has developed to be capable of. In fact, there are some who say that the brain and the act of writing have co-developed because the tool has affected the way we think, and the way we think has developed the tool to the point where the two are now inextricably intermeshed. I also found something else when I love to write in public. And so I got up in the morning, I'm driving to my favorite cafe, I've got my laptop, I've got my journal, and I get there and I've left my pen, my lovely favorite calligraphy pen, right? And so I go, but I've got to write this stuff down. And so I go, all right, I'll type it. So I'm typing it down, and it's just like dictating. It's stiff, it's rigid. There's even bullet points. I never write with bullet points. I am a poet manqué. I mean, I do not write in bullet points. And I hate it. But I get everything down. And if any of you are writers, you know the worst thing in the world is to write the same thing again. I should have said that's deep, by the way. Except we writers already know that. So I went home, and for about 3 hours, I was just very grumpy. And then I said, oh, I've got to do it. So I started from the same place again with my pen. And what I wrote was completely different. It was fluent. It was imaginative. It was rhythmic. It incorporated ideas and images that had never occurred to me while I was typing it. It had a sense of shape, it had a sense of conclusion, and it was a piece of writing I was proud of. And I thought, this is really interesting, especially at a time in history when those of us in the West are busy saying writing is something we do on a keyboard. And that's another issue that I won't get into now, but is very much in my book, by hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end with a story and a quote. So I mentioned several times to you a journal. this journal I've been keeping, and that I use for writing by hand, by hand, by hand, by hand, by hand. There is an astonishing series of pieces of research that have been done into journals starting in the early 1980s. And it turns out that if you keep a journal, you are less likely to suffer from depression. You are more likely to recover quickly from serious injuries or from surgical procedures. You are more likely to be resistant to HIV/AIDS. You are more likely to be resistant to cancer. It is unbelievable. We're not just talking about psychological, we're talking about physiological issues, which those who keep journals regularly are in a completely different relationship to. And I found this really interesting. And I'm going to tell you a story which I really shouldn't, because this is the punchline of my book. And so when I've told you the story and we get to the Q&A, I'm going to hypnotize you all so you all forget this. Okay, so this is what happened. I had been feeling very, very stressed as it was getting towards deadline and all this kind of thing. And I had actually had a series of symptoms that I thought were heart attacks, but they were just stress symptoms. And they were sufficiently unsettling. I made an appointment with my doctor, and I got in the car and I drove down to the ferry because I live on the other side of the lake. And as I'm in the car, the same thing's happening. I'm feeling pressure here. I'm feeling this. And I get onto the ferry and I talk to the ferry hands, dock hands, which I love to do, and it all goes away. And I get off the ferry, I get back in the car, and again, there is this sense of pressure and tension. And I also realize I'm not breathing very well. I'm starting to wheeze slightly from all of this. And I got to a cafe because I was a few minutes early for my appointment. And I got my journal out and I started to write about what was happening to me. And instantly, it felt as if I had been wearing a flak jacket and it fell off. And I realized that my breathing had improved and that my sense of stress and pressure had disappeared. And I thought, this is really weird. By the way, the name of the cafe was called the Good Times Cafe. That's the title for the last chapter, right? So what that goes to show is that writing, where it comes from and where it goes to, is something about the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And when I was talking to Anusha about the fact that we think about what we're writing even as we're writing it, in a sense, there's a dialogue between ourselves and a kind of an invisible companion who's listening to what we are writing and commenting back to it. And this narrative that takes place is, I think, something totally extraordinary and really worth studying. And I'm actually going to read you the very end of what I'm planning to say. And I apologize for actually reading this. But I wrote it this morning when it was still dark. And so therefore it seems as if it's important. So Coleridge, remember Coleridge, the poet? He himself was really interested in where writing comes from. And he had a vision that the imagination, the act of imagination, was an act of communion with the imagination of the whole. In fact, he and Wordsworth used this phrase, the soul, the imagination of the whole. In other words, the kind of universal consciousness. That imagination, he said, was a kind of bridge between the individual and the universal consciousness. In fact, it's not entirely unlike what we saw just now, with the whole idea of those sigil characters being ways of connecting to, exactly. So what this means is that it arrives as a kind of synesthesia. So synesthesia is when one sense is connected to another sense. And so what arrives may be pictures, or maybe sounds, or maybe feelings. And as writers, our job is to try and corral them, to catch them, and to put them into words before they disappear. And this, I say, I'm reading this out because this is a sentence I'm happy with, right? This is the same as plagiarism and exactly the opposite. We are stealing, yes, but we are stealing from the universe. We have no idea how or where it comes from or what we're going to steal next. But to steal from the universe is to share everything. Exactly. And so I say, I have no idea where this talk came from, right? There's almost nothing I've said to you today that I was thinking about 3 days ago. I have no doubt that somebody could actually go through all of my conversations and my reading and say, this word was from here, and this phrase was from here, and this was this conversation that you were having with Marianne, and this is what Anusha said. And that may be true. But what I've realized that my job as a writer is to give that back to everybody. And so in the end of Writing Beyond Writing, having asked over and over again, what is writing? I came to the conclusion that writing is a gift. Writing is a way in which we give something of ourselves, using a certain medium to other people. And I'm going to quote the philosopher Elton John. My gift is my song, he said. And this one's for you. And my gift is my writing and my speaking. And this one is for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was wonderful. Truly a tour de force. I just wanted to make everybody aware there's a new publication that we just put out here at West with Tim, Writing Systems of the Otherworld.
Yes, this talk was not this piece of writing. This is how it began, and the two are, in a sense, cousins. I highly encourage you to grab this because there's some interesting stuff in there, and it speaks to Akim that this symposium on this subject is the first that I know of in the history of writing that has asked serious questions about writings and its relationship with dreams and the other world. So kudos to him. This is mostly about where do writing systems come from, and I'm asking where does writing come from?
Wonderful. Well, are there any comments, questions? Yes, wonderful.
What does this mean for education of children, for learning to write?
Absolutely fabulous. You have just picked up. Oh.
If you want to, or you can stand behind me.
Actually, you know what I'd really like to do is to walk amongst all of you, so that because otherwise it's like, is this guy really that superior to you that he should be looking down at you like this? No. So that is a great question, and in fact, the next to last chapter of my book, By Hand. Again, all of my books are available in enteringotherworlds.com/shop. So what does this tell us about the education of children, especially for writing? So, in the early 20th century, there was a young art teacher who was born near Birmingham in England and went to art college and got really interested in the relationship between writing and gesture. So there's one way of looking at writing, which is to say writing consists of symbols. But there's a totally different way of looking at writing, which says writing is an act carried out by humans with their body. And she was really interested in the fact that writing is in effect an extension of the human body in a series of gestures. And so she designed a practice exercise for kids who had not yet learned to write. And they were not asked to copy the same letter over and over again until they got it perfect. What they were asked to do was to do a series of patterns. So they would go up and down like this, or they would go round and round like this, etc. And she said in her book about the subject, which is called Writing and Writing Patterns, she said, this teaches the essential cursivity of writing. And so she sees, as an artist, the fact that writing is a way of gesturing through a medium, a way of expressing not only ideas, but also the flow of ideas and the flow of thought. And so my pitch is that what this says for education is that writing should be taught actually as an art rather than as an essential life skill, which most people are not convinced of. And in any case, I have this thing, you can get when you're first learning to write, you can get a fact wrong once. You can get a W wrong 1,000 times. And for kids who are constantly being told, this is wrong, you must do it this way, essentially they're learning to hate writing and to think of it in a way which is exactly the opposite to which I've come to think of it. So, for example, this morning, at one point, I was telling Johannes this, I was writing my journal and I wrote the most perfect N. And I said, I have never written an N. I'm not sure I've ever seen an N as perfect as that. Okay, other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I was wondering, like you mentioned the keyboard writing and with the hand gestures, and where does a typewriter stand in this?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've come to understand a great deal is that the way we learn is far more by doing than by thinking and being told. And when we learn to write by hand, we actually, first of all, carry out some quite elaborate manual gestures. And secondly, we have 34 muscles in our hands, and they remember every one of those because those muscles are all doing different things for every different letter. When you think about a typewriter or a keyboard, essentially what you're doing, I hope this is a word you know, you're stultifying yourself. You're making yourself stupid. Because what you're doing is you're reducing all of the action to the single act of depressing, right? Instead of actually shaping something which appeals to your aesthetic sense and to your motor skills as well and all that kind of thing. So really, a typewriter was the first step towards industrializing the act of writing. And it also carried out what was already happening in printing, which is it atomizes writing. So by atomizes, I mean it takes writing and breaks it into individual elements or different, boxes in a type tray, as opposed to saying writing is something A, manual, B, continuous, C, expressive, D, human. Other questions? Yeah. I'll throw it.
Thank you very much for this talk. I was asking me, did you see a difference, or you're talking about flow for writing, but for carving materials like wood or stone, are you in the same idea of the flow of idea? Or?
I love this man. And what he's illustrated is that, yes, basically all of my ideas came about because my entry into the world of writing of scripts, of typography, of writing systems, was by carving. It wasn't by linguistics, it wasn't by learning languages, it wasn't by learning scripts. And it also wasn't by typography. And so, yeah, carving was the first thing that made me realize that there is a profound relationship between a culture and its script. So I was carving the Baybayin script from the Philippines, which was originally incised in bamboo. I didn't know that at the time. I'm just thinking, why are these letters so thin and so hard to carve and so curvy? And so I started looking into it. And those relationships are vital to our understanding of what writing is. The other thing I noticed, I'm going to do a demonstration. I'm going to ask you, could you hold my microphone? That's fine. You can say things if you want to. But so when you're carving a curve, the whole of your body moves. And the more smoothly it moves, the better the curve is. If you start doing this, then you're not going to get a nice, smooth, clean line. And so really you're using your entire upper body and then also your core and your legs. And as I was doing that over and over, I was thinking, this is like dance, this is like music, you know, what is going on here? Many thanks. Round of applause. Other questions? Yes. There's yourself, and then there's someone at the back. I can barely see. Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there a way back? Because we industrialized our writing because of production, because of ease, because that we have our writings digitized. But for instance, now with the advance of AI, that your handwriting, that writers start to understand, hey, writing is a better solution for my mind and way of working, that because the computer can now understand that your N is an N instead of scanning it back and having someone digitize it, that people might start to write again because in the end it can be understood as text again.
When I started making my living as a writer in the early 1980s, I could buy all of the equipment I needed for half a day's salary. Nowadays, if you want to start writing, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. And the difference between those is really important because it means now somebody has an opportunity to make money off what you think writing is. So if you think writing is a chore, a labor, you know, something you don't really want to do, then of course you're going to get a robot to do it for you. If you think that writing is something that is personal to you and to the reader and is a form of expression, then you might hesitate before saying, I'm going to give it to AI to do, or I'm going to give it to some other machine to do, right? So the elephant in the room here is money. And I got a great illustration of this when I was doing my research on a chapter for By Hand, where I saw a short video episode that was made by the BBC. And it begins with a journalist who starts out by saying, I have terrible handwriting. And I keep thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could get someone else to do my writing for me? And by writing, he actually meant handwriting rather than, just on type. And so you can now buy a wide range of machines that will mimic your handwriting. And he went off to interview somebody who had, whose company was doing these machines. They start at $1,700. It's more than wage, right? But what was really interesting about this was that he did some writing, and then he gave the pen to the machine, and the machine wrote the same thing, and he's kind of going, wow. And they brought in a graphologist to look at the two, to see if he could tell the difference between the two. Graphology is another whole subject. You'll have to get me afterwards to talk about that. And the graphologist said, yes, this is clearly yours, and this is clearly the machine's, because the machines lacks any kind of soul or warmth or whatever. But then he said to the reporter, by the way, I love your handwriting. It's really interesting. It's generous. It's creative. And the reporter is struck dumb. The first sentence of my book By Hand is, this book begins with 2 photos and with shame. Because we are progressively getting more and more shamed into believing that our own writing is inadequate, is incomprehensible. I can't tell you. People would say to me, oh, my handwriting's terrible. It looks like the handwriting of a serial killer. I mean, that is a degree of self-loathing that is almost inexplicable until you realize that somebody is carrying out, well, many people are carrying out campaigns to convince you that your own writing is insufficient, laborious, slow, illegible. Somebody at the back. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a niece, she's 2 years old, and whenever she sees me writing, she tries to copy it, but she's not able to make alphabets, but to her it's still writing. So how would you relate language with writing? Would we just call it mark making, or would we call it writing?
Excellent. I sense a PhD in the making right there. And the reason I make that pathetic attempt at a joke is that I am profoundly academic. I have had positions in universities, but I only have at best one toe in the academic world. My daughter, I have two daughters. My older daughter, when she was maybe 2, maybe 3, she took a blue wax crayon and she wrote all over a piece of paper, H-O, 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 H-O. It was the most wonderful thing, you know. I don't know if she knew what it was or what it said, but it was, I had this joke that I sent it in as a script for a laugh track on a TV show, but they rejected it because it was too literary. Yes, everybody makes marks. Everybody invents. The notion of right and wrong is a profoundly dangerous and destabilizing notion. It's an extension of power. I know that, you know, I'm in Northern Europe here, so I can talk in terms of power and hegemonies and all that kind of stuff. Yes. But in fact, writing is something that is constantly reinvented by every individual. I'm doing a project right now where people sent me postcards and letters that were handwritten, and I photographed the letter B whenever it turned out. I'm making this big poster, which is just the letter B. And that, to me, that says many different things, but one of the things it says is, there is not a B. There's your B. There's your B. There's your B. There's your B when you're tired. There's your B when you're writing on a special piece of paper for a special person. There's your B when you're feeling apprehensive about the person you're writing to, and you're trying to figure out how to write to them, etc. Writing is literally in your hands. And one of the things that is so fascinating about it, and I'm going to end with this, is as a subject, it is right under our noses, and yet it's under the radar. And the more we can have conversations like this, thank you, Hakeem, the better things are going to be. I'll just stick with it.